Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari, and today I am coming at you with my October wrap-up just a teensy bit late. Just a little bit. It's not that late. It's only the middle of the month. So, for October, I read 23 books for a total of 9,353 pages. That was 407 average pages per book, so I read a lot of longer books this month, and an average of 302 pages per day. Just to be clear about that, I don't actually read 302 pages per day. I usually tend to read like a whole lot of pages on the weekends, which ups my overall average. And how I calculate pages per day is just take the total number of pages and divide it by days in the month. All 23 books I read were adult books, no children's, no young adult, none of that. 12 were by male authors, 10 were by female authors, and 1 was by a non-binary author. 11 of them were physical books, 10 were ebooks, and I read 2 audiobooks this month, which is pretty good for me. Because it was October, 11 of those books were horror books. 6 were fantasy, which you'll see why here in a little bit. 2 of them were nonfic, 2 of them were thriller, 1 was a graphic novel, and one was just general fiction. So, of the books that I read, 10 of the books that I read were for my Century Challenge, where I read 1 book published every year from 1900 through 2020. October was the 1990s. These were mostly the books that I read. I think I had 1 ebook, because I think there's only 9 here. I might have had 2 ebooks, I don't remember. But that's in a completely separate video, and that is linked up in the cards. Next up, I wanted to finish all of the 2019 Goodreads Choice winners and highest rated that I had started back in January. This is where I read the highest rated and the winner of not every category, but almost every category. I had 3 books remaining, and the video for that will be out sometime this month. I'm not exactly sure when, but you'll definitely see it this month. So the final 3 books that I ended up reading to wrap that up was The Lost Causes of Bleak Creek by Rhett and Link. That was in the horror category, and I think it was the highest rated. It was very mediocre to me. There was a lot of fantasy aspects to it, but I guess it was kind of a horror thriller type of book. I really honestly think it was just popular because the authors were famous YouTubers. I don't think that actually deserved the recognition that it got as a horror novel. I think it was really just based off of who the authors were. Next up was Verity by Colleen Hoover. This was in the romance category as highest rated. It's a thriller. I mean, there was a romance aspect to it if you consider a man cheating on his wife while she's in a coma living in the same house as romance. It's not romance. That shit was really fucked up. I, again, thought it was mediocre. I'm not big on cheating. So that probably turned me off of the book. I thought all of the characters were like incredibly awful people, which I guess they were supposed to be, but it made me not like it. So mediocre. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read, but it wasn't like great. The last one I read was The Five by Haley Rubenhold. This was in one of the nonfiction categories. I cannot remember which one, maybe historical, but it was the story of the canonical 5 women killed by Jack the Ripper, and each chapter was basically a history, as far as the author could tell, of the 5 women. A lot of it was pulled from legal paperwork where you have lawsuits, criminal trials, birth certificates, any sort of like government documentation that they could find was used, or that Haley Rubenhold could find was used, and it was good to humanize these women, because if you asked about the 5 women that were killed by Jack the Ripper to a normal person on the street, they're going to be like, oh, the prostitutes. Turns out 3 of them were 100% not prostitutes, never had been, no prostitution going on at all, they were just homeless women. One of the women, there is no indication that she was a prostitute at the time. She had earlier in her life been a prostitute, but there was no indication that she was still working as a prostitute, and only the final woman killed was actually a working prostitute. So the fact that we all have it in our head that, oh yeah, he just killed a bunch of he killed a bunch of prostitutes, yeah, whatever, that's what they get for selling their body on the streets. No, they were just poor. And they had addiction problems or other sorts of problems, but they weren't prostitutes. So learning that, I think, was good, but reading about poor women in Victorian England, I can't say is interesting. So, educational, not the most interesting thing I've ever read. The next category is one of the categories of why I ended up reading a lot of fantasy, and that was because on October 31st, the World Fantasy Awards came out, so I was finishing off reading all of the books for that. For that, I read The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie and The Memory Police by Yoko Agawa. I have a completely separate video on this, so I will link it up there instead of regurgitating all of that all over again. The next section of books is kind of based off of November's expected TBR. Goodreads Choice Awards come out at like the very, very end of October and go to December 8th, and I wanted to read the 20 nominated books for the fantasy category, so based off of some educated guesses, I was reading books that I thought would be nominated for Best Fantasy of 2020. First in this section, I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and I was right, this is nominated. I'm glad I read it. This is an adorable, cutesy, you're gonna throw up because this is so cute fantasy about a government, program that that runs orphanages for monstrous children. In this universe, monsters like vampires, werewolves, fairies, whatever, all of that exist, and they're treated like a lower class of citizen. There's a lot of racial and prejudice going on because of their monster status. And this school on an island in the Cerulean Sea is where the worst of the worst kids go. So you have werewolves who can turn people with a bite. It's supposed to just be genetic. You've got creatures who no one really knows what they are, so maybe they're not actually scary or harmful, it's just they're the only ones that exist. And then you have the Antichrist, the son of Satan, And the main character in this book goes out as a government employee to observe this orphanage and see if the master of the orphanage is doing a good job raising these children, or if the orphanage needs to be shut down. And that's the basics of it, and it's adorable. It's grossly adorable in every way possible. The next one that I read was From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this is a vampire fantasy. Interestingly enough, it is very, very similar type of story to House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, but From Blood and Ash was put in the romance category and House of Earth and Blood was put in the fantasy category. Even though they're both paranormal romances, they were put in two completely different categories. So I ended up reading this. I loved it. It was so good. Exactly spot on the type of semi-smutty paranormal romance that I like. But the fact that both of them got nominated in different categories was really weird, and then I ended up not needing to read it because it's in the romance category and not the fantasy category like I thought it was going to be. This is basically a universe where there are 3 different kinds of vampires. So you've got the just vampires who are people who just live forever. There's no need for them to drink blood or anything like that. They're just immortal. Then you have the more traditional type of vampire where they do need to drink human blood to survive. And that kind of vampire, anybody they kill with their bite will turn into the like brainless zombie-like vampire that just attacks and kills. The main character is kind of a virgin sacrifice or something like that. It's not super explained well at the beginning of the book, so going into detail about it will be spoiling, but she's the maiden and she is basically raised pure. No one's allowed to speak to her, no one's allowed to see her face, and she's been raised like this her entire life, and she's sad, she's lonely, she has no friends, she can't talk to anybody, and her caregivers are emotionally, physically, and sexually abusive without actually like doing anything that would compromise her virgin state. So not great for her, and it's kind of her leading up to the time that she needs to give her unexplained virgin sacrifice that's not really a sacrifice, but it's kind of a sacrifice. The summary on Goodreads explains it way better than I do, but I loved it. It was good. I am happy. Yes. The last one for the Predicting Goodreads was Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a fantasy based off of indigenous tribes. I didn't understand this at all. I was so confused by this whole book, and I also don't remember it. Like, it's not memorable to me. A lot of other people liked it. I thought it was very mediocre, and I struggle to remember what it's about. So this one just wasn't for me. I know I liked the world building, but the actual plot of the story, I didn't care about at all. So take that with a grain of salt. I don't have much else to say about it because I honestly don't even remember what it was about. The next section I'm going into is my book club. So every month I do a book club with Belle's Book Club through Instagram, and we pick a book to read, and this month we read Broken Girls by Simone St. James. The theme was thriller, so we went through 3 thrillers. This is the one we decided to pick. And this is like kind of a ghost story and kind of a thriller, where there is a girls' boarding school, and then you have the 1950s when this boarding school is still open, and a girl goes missing, and then you have in 2014 where a girl's sister was killed by her boyfriend on the grounds of this school, which had long ago shut down, and she discovers that they are restoring the school. And a lot of this revolves around like this school and different things that happen to women on the grounds of this school. There is a ghost aspect in here that didn't make any fucking sense at all. Like, I feel like the author just put it in to be like, ooh, spooky ghost, ooh. But it didn't make any sense at all. At all. Other than that, I thought it was decent, not great, but I enjoyed it. I don't know what else to say. And the final section of books that I read were arcs. So the first arc I read was White Trash Warlock by David Slayton. And this one I picked up from NetGalley because it sounded hilarious. And this was hilarious. It is about a gay warlock boy from Guthrie, Oklahoma, who he can sense the magical world, but he has like little to no power. So that kind of makes him ideal for a situation where something is killing off people with really insanely high levels of power. And he goes to Denver, Colorado to investigate this thing. It's hilarious, and it's really good. I really enjoyed it. I am looking forward to the rest of the books in these series. This is kind of just a fun palate cleanser type book. There's not anything like really deep or serious going on with it. It's just white trash fun, and it's funny. The jokes are good. What else can I say? The next arc that I read was The Haunting of Beatrix Green by Rachel Hawkins, Ash Parsons, and Vicky Alvear, what is her last name? Schechter, I think? I might have typed that wrong when I wrote it down. Anyway, this is kind of a serialized haunted house slash mystery, and like Sherlock Holmesy type of mystery. This takes place in Victorian England, and it has to do with a psychic and a like haunted house. It's serialized, so the action is kind of like non-stop throughout, because each chapter is going to be published by itself. So each chapter needs to have like something at the end of it to make you want to come back for the next installment and read more. So action throughout. If you like serialized things like that, there's all like the little twist or like hooks at the end that'll keep you coming back for more. This was cute. I mean, it's a haunted house, so it's not really cute. It was kind of cute. It was, if you like mystery, you'll probably like it. It's not anything new or inventive. It's something you've probably seen a million times before, but if you really like the genre, it's another little staple and another little snack from the mystery slash horror genre, if that makes sense. I liked it. Again, this was like another little palate cleanser. And not like the greatest thing I've ever read, nothing moving or brand new, but it was really fun to read. The next book that I read was an audiobook from Libro FM, where I'm part of the influencer program. So this book and the next book I both got from Libro FM for free. I'm not required to review these books, I just wanted to read both of them. So the first one is The Death of Vivek Oji by Akweke Emeze. This is the story of like the life through death of a just fun, insanely flamboyant young man named Vivek Oji, and it takes place in Nigeria. And at the very, very beginning of the book, and you can kind of tell in the title, his mother finds his naked body on her doorstep. And throughout the book it goes like forward and backwards in time, where you'll have parts from like his birth and him growing up and what kind of child he was growing up, and then it'll skip to like modern day, where his mother is trying to figure out what happened to her son, how did he die, like why would somebody kill him. There was, the day of his death, there was a riot in the market. Everybody's telling her like he just died in the riot in the market, and she's like, so who brought him home? Why is he not wearing clothes? And it's dealing with grief. It's dealing with being queer in a country where it's illegal to be a homosexual. And then the difference between being flamboyant and being homosexual. Like, just because you're homosexual doesn't necessarily mean you're flamboyant. It also discusses being trans. It discusses family. It discusses prejudice. And it was a really moving book and a very interesting, like for me, it was very interesting to read about like Nigerian culture from that book. It's very sad. And I liked it. The audiobook specifically has two narrators. You got a male and a female narrator. I thought they both did an amazing job. I thoroughly enjoyed the book overall. And the last audiobook that I read was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a horror book, but it is also a discussion of Native Americans from the perspective of the Blackfoot tribe, and Stephen Graham Jones, the author, is Black. He's a Blackfoot, or he's part of the Blackfoot tribe. So this, basically the premise of this, or the basic premise of this book is 4 Native American men from the Blackfoot tribe go hunting elk on the elders' land where they're not supposed to hunt elk. And when they find the elk, they find like a huge herd of them, and instead of just killing what they need and taking what they need, they kind of panic, I guess, and then kill all of the elk, including a pregnant elk who should have not been pregnant at that time. It was like the wrong season for her to be pregnant. And then where they killed the elk, because it's snowy and everything, they can't get the elk up and out of the ravine that they killed them in, so they ended up just wasting all of that meat and just having to leave it there. So 10 years later, they are being like haunted and killed off one by one by the elk-headed woman, who is like the spirit of this pregnant elk that these 4 men killed. And that's basically, like, the story is just where you're questioning, like, are they really being haunted? Are they just kind of insane? Is this like a drug or drinking problem? Is there like guilt? And it's all the questions there. Plus you also have, throughout the background of the whole thing, it's just prejudice and hatred towards Native Americans, and just many groups of indigenous people by white people who just stole their land. And then, at least in the United States, like, many tribes are like left to reservations, which are not well kept, not supported by the government in a reasonably decent way, and alcoholism, poverty, everything like that is very prevalent, along with racism. And it kind of brings all of these into the horror story. For the like title of the book, where it's called The Only Good Indians, is that there's a quote. The only good Indian is a dead Indian was actually a quote made by a white American general at some point in history that doesn't deserve to be talked about because he sounds like trash. Throughout the book, the characters refer to themselves as Indians. I'm not even going to begin to speak on if that is like socially acceptable or correct or whatever. I am not Native American. I'm not gonna comment on that. The author is Native American. If he wants to call himself an Indian, then he can sure as fuck call himself an Indian, and you're not gonna get a question about it from me. So I know some people were like, how the hell is this white guy calling Native Americans Indians? He's not white. He's part of the Blackfoot tribe. Don't be a white person and tell a person of color what they're allowed to say or believe about their own ethnicity. That's absurd. But that is all the books that I read in October. Let me know down below what you thought. As far as the horror books go, not a single one of them scared me. I apparently am not a horror reader. Just, it's not for me. I didn't mind any of the books. I liked a lot of them, but I'm not getting scared over here. I'm gonna stick to jump scares out of horror movies and video games. But I will catch you in the next video.